Tensions in the Middle East are reaching a breaking point as Iran openly threatens Israel's Dimona nuclear facility, signaling a dangerous escalation. This isn't just about Israel and Iran. Neighboring countries and global powers are on edge, fearing a conflict that could spiral out of control. The threat to Dimona moves the standoff from covert operations to the brink of direct confrontation, raising the stakes for the entire region. As the world watches, the question is no longer if a conflict will erupt but how devastating its impact could be. Deep in Israel's Negev desert, the Dimona facility stands as the core of Israel's nuclear deterrence, and a prime target for Iran. Dimona's secrecy and strategic value make it both a shield and a lightning rod, embodying Israel's ultimate security guarantee. An attack here would shatter regional stability, risking a catastrophic response and rewriting the rules of engagement in the Middle East. The fate of Dimona now holds the potential to ignite a conflict with consequences far beyond Israel's borders. For Egypt, Dimona's proximity turns Iran's threat into an immediate national emergency, with the risk of radioactive fallout crossing into Sinai. A strike on Dimona could devastate Egypt's environment, economy, and public health, threatening the Suez Canal and millions of lives. The crisis forces Cairo to reconsider its security posture and diplomatic strategy as regional chaos looms. Egypt now faces the grim reality that its neighbor's war could become its own catastrophe. The roots of today's crisis trace back to 1979, when Iran's revolution transformed Israel from a quiet partner into its sworn enemy. This ideological rift fueled decades of proxy conflict, with both nations viewing each other as existential threats. Iran's strategy shifted to indirect confrontation, building networks of allies and proxies across the region. The rivalry is now a zero-sum game, driven by clashing worldviews rather than territorial disputes. Unable to fight openly, Iran and Israel have waged a shadow war, assassinations, cyber attacks, and sabotage defining their conflict. High-profile killings and operations like the Stuxnet virus have crippled Iran's nuclear ambitions and escalated tensions. Iran has retaliated with its own covert strikes, fueling a cycle of retribution and constant brinkmanship. This relentless shadow conflict keeps both nations on edge, with every move risking a sudden catastrophic escalation. Iran's strategy against Israel relies on a vast network of proxy forces across the Middle East, armed and funded by the IRGC. Hezbollah in Lebanon is the most powerful, with a huge arsenal aimed at Israel. Iran also backs groups in Gaza and Syria, creating a ring of fire that keeps Israel occupied and extends Tehran's reach to Israel's borders. At the very heart of the Iran-Israel rivalry lies the existential issue of nuclear capability. For Israel, the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran is an unacceptable red-line scenario that threatens the very survival of the state. Israeli leaders have consistently vowed to do whatever is necessary to prevent Tehran from acquiring a nuclear bomb. This position is driven by Iran's revolutionary ideology, its repeated calls for Israel's destruction, and its funding of terrorist groups on Israel's borders. From Jerusalem's perspective, an Iranian bomb would not be for deterrence, but for coercion and potential use, fundamentally altering the balance of power and placing Israel under a permanent existential shadow. For Iran, the pursuit of nuclear technology is framed as a matter of national right and sovereign pride, intended for peaceful energy purposes. However, the program's history of secrecy, its military dimensions, and its defiance of international oversight have convinced Israel and many Western powers that its ultimate goal is weaponization. For Tehran, a nuclear capability could be the ultimate guarantee of the regime's survival, deterring any foreign attempts at regime change, much like North Korea's arsenal has secured the Kim dynasty. It would also cement Iran's status as the dominant regional power, allowing it to project its influence with greater impunity and challenge the long-standing Israeli-American military superiority in the Middle East. This clash of non-negotiable positions has created a dangerous and escalating standoff. Israel has pursued a strategy of disruption, using the covert actions of its shadow war to sabotage and delay the Iranian program. At the same time, it has maintained a credible military threat, openly discussing preemptive strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities as a last resort. This has been complemented by intense diplomatic pressure and crippling international sanctions, aimed at forcing Iran to abandon its ambitions. This multi-pronged approach has successfully slowed Iran's progress over the years, but it has not stopped it, leading to a perpetual state of crisis and brinkmanship. In recent years, the standoff has reached a critical point. Following the U.S. withdrawal from the 2015 nuclear deal, Iran has accelerated its nuclear activities, enriching uranium to levels closer to weapons grade and restricting access for international inspectors. This has significantly shortened Iran's breakout time, the time it would need to produce enough fissile material for a single nuclear weapon. As Iran moves closer to the nuclear threshold, the window for a diplomatic solution narrows, and the likelihood of an Israeli military strike grows. This is the context in which Iran's threats against Dimona must be understood, as a deterrent against a potential Israeli attack on its own nuclear sites, turning the nuclear standoff into a terrifying game of mutual assured destruction. Deep in the Negev desert lies Dimona, Israel's most closely guarded secret. Born in the 1950s under Ben-Gurion and Peres, this facility was built with French help, shrouded in secrecy, and disguised as a textile plant. Its true purpose, to ensure Israel's survival through nuclear deterrence. Even today, Dimona stands as a symbol of self-reliance, mystery, and the lengths a nation will go to protect its future. The Dimona facility is the heart of Israel's policy of nuclear ambiguity, never confirming or denying its arsenal. This strategy, known as Amimut, deters adversaries while avoiding international backlash. The so-called Samson option refers to Israel's alleged last-resort nuclear response if faced with annihilation. Dimona's secrecy is its power, shaping the region's strategic balance and ensuring Israel's enemies must always consider the risk of mutual destruction. For over 60 years, Dimona has stood as Israel's silent guardian in the Negev desert, yet it is now an aging, vulnerable symbol. Its old reactor and lack of independent oversight raise deep safety concerns. Dimona's symbolic power makes it a prime target for Israel's adversaries. A successful attack could unleash disaster far beyond Israel's borders, turning a protector into a regional threat. Iran's threat to target Israel's Dimona nuclear facility marks a dramatic shift. After years of covert attacks, Tehran is now signaling it will respond to any major strike on its nuclear program with a devastating counterstrike. This is psychological warfare meant to shatter Israel's sense of invincibility and force Jerusalem to reconsider the risks of escalation. The stakes have never been higher. Once dismissed, Iran's threats against Dimona now carry real weight. The IRGC's advanced precision-guided missiles, like the Fateh 313 and Khaibar Shekan, can reach anywhere in Israel. Recent conflicts have proven Iran's willingness and capability to use these weapons, and a saturation attack could overwhelm even Israel's sophisticated defenses. For Israel and its neighbors, the threat is no longer theoretical, it's a strategic reality. Iran's threats against Dimona are part of a broader message to the world, aimed at the U.S., Gulf states, its own people, and the international community. Tehran warns Washington and its allies, any attack on Iran will have devastating consequences. For Gulf states, it's a reminder of Iran's power, and a warning against siding with Israel. Domestically, it rallies support and distracts from hardship. Globally, Iran asserts itself as a regional power that cannot be ignored. Iran's strategy of targeting Dimona is a textbook case of asymmetric warfare, using a weaker position to exploit a stronger adversary's vulnerabilities. Israel's nuclear facility at Dimona, in a densely populated area, is a critical weak point. By threatening it, Iran turns Israel's greatest strength into a potential liability, creating psychological pressure and a powerful deterrent, without needing nuclear weapons itself. For Egypt, the most terrifying consequence of an attack on the Dimona facility isn't political, it's environmental. A radioactive plume could drift across the border, carried by prevailing winds, threatening the Sinai, Suez Canal cities, and even Cairo. The fallout would devastate health, contaminate water and soil, and overwhelm Egypt's ability to respond. Radiation would become a deadly, permanent feature of the Egyptian landscape. Beyond the immediate human tragedy, a radioactive release from Dimona would inflict a deep and honestly, potentially irreversible wound on Egypt's natural environment, particularly the unique and fragile ecosystem of the Sinai Peninsula. This vast desert landscape, often perceived as barren, is actually a place of significant biodiversity and profound historical and religious importance. It is home to a delicate web of life adapted to extreme conditions, including rare species of flora and fauna like the Nubian ibex and the Sinai baton blue butterfly. This entire ecosystem, which has evolved over millennia, would be thrown into chaos by the introduction of widespread radioactive contamination, leading to ecological collapse on a massive scale. The contamination would seep into every level of the food chain. Radioactive particles would settle on the sparse vegetation, which would then be consumed by herbivores. These animals would, in turn, be eaten by predators, concentrating the toxins at each step. The peninsula's scarce and precious water resources, primarily underground aquifers and seasonal wadis, would become poisoned reservoirs of radioactive material, rendering them unusable for wildlife, livestock, and human communities alike. The long half-lives of isotopes like cesium-137 mean that this contamination would not be a temporary problem. It would persist for decades, even centuries, turning vast swaths of the Sinai into a permanent radioactive wasteland. The damage would not be confined to the land. The Sinai Peninsula is bordered by the Red Sea, a global treasure renowned for its vibrant coral reef ecosystems, which are among the most diverse and resilient in the world. These reefs support a thriving tourism industry that is a vital source of revenue for the Egyptian economy. Radioactive runoff from the land carried by flash floods through the wadis would inevitably flow into the sea, threatening these delicate marine habitats. The introduction of radioactive materials could cause widespread death of coral, fish, and other marine life, devastating both the natural heritage of the Red Sea and the economic foundation of resort cities like Sharm el-Sheikh and Dahab. For Egypt, a nation that sees itself as the cradle of civilization and a guardian of sacred history, this environmental desecration would be a profound blow. The Sinai is not just a piece of territory, it is a land steeped in religious significance for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, home to landmarks like Mount Sinai and the St. Catherine's Monastery. The poisoning of this sacred ground would be a cultural and spiritual catastrophe in addition to an ecological one. The fallout from Dimona would thus destroy more than just lives and habitats, it would erase a priceless part of human heritage, leaving behind a legacy of contamination that would haunt the region for generations. An Iranian attack on Dimona, and the likely massive Israeli retaliation, would send shockwaves through the Middle East, with Egypt at the epicenter. The Camp David Accords have kept peace for decades, but a regional war could shatter this stability, trigger refugee crises, and empower extremists in Sinai. Egypt would face impossible diplomatic choices, risking its security, economy, and role as a regional mediator. The fallout from a Dimona incident would not be limited to health, the environment, or high-level geopolitics. It would trigger a devastating socioeconomic domino effect that would shake the very foundations of the Egyptian state. The first and most immediate casualty would be Egypt's multi-billion-dollar tourism industry. The perception of the entire region as a radioactive conflict zone would instantly halt the flow of international visitors, not just to Sinai resorts like Sharm el-Sheikh, but to the entire country, including the cultural hubs of Luxor, Aswan, and Cairo. This industry is a primary source of foreign currency and employs millions of Egyptians. Its collapse would lead to mass unemployment and a severe economic recession. Simultaneously, the strategic and economic importance of the Suez Canal would be critically threatened. The canal is more than just a waterway. It is a symbol of Egyptian sovereignty and a vital artery of global trade, generating over $9 billion in annual revenue for the state. An attack on Dimona and the subsequent regional instability, let alone the potential for direct contamination of the canal's environs, would cause maritime insurance rates to skyrocket. Shipping companies would be forced to reroute their vessels around Africa, as seen during other regional crises. The loss of canal revenue, even temporarily, would deal a crippling blow to Egypt's national budget and its ability to import essential goods like wheat and fuel. This sudden economic shock would have a cascading effect on Egyptian society. A sharp decline in foreign currency reserves from both tourism and the Suez Canal would lead to a rapid devaluation of the Egyptian pound, fueling hyperinflation and making basic necessities unaffordable for millions of ordinary citizens. The government, already grappling with significant debt, would have its capacity to provide subsidies and social services severely diminished precisely when they are needed most. This economic hardship could easily translate into widespread social unrest and political instability, creating a fertile ground for dissent and challenging the authority of the state at its most vulnerable moment. Ultimately, the threat to Dimona is a threat to Egypt's entire national project. The country's vision, 2030 Plan for Sustainable Development and Economic Modernization, relies heavily on a stable regional environment, foreign investment, and the continued growth of its key economic sectors. A regional war and a nuclear incident next door would render these plans obsolete overnight. Instead of focusing on building a prosperous future, Egypt would be consumed by crisis management, containing environmental disaster, managing humanitarian catastrophe, suppressing internal unrest, and navigating a treacherous new security landscape. The fallout would be a comprehensive national crisis, setting Egypt's progress back by decades and jeopardizing the well-being of its more than 110 million people. Egypt faces a grave threat from the Dimona standoff, prompting a shift to proactive defense. The military reinforces the eastern flank, deploying advanced air defense systems across Sinai and the Suez Canal. Intelligence services intensify surveillance, while cooperation with key partners ensures rapid threat response. Every branch prepares for crisis, determined to shield the nation from regional fallout and assert Egypt's sovereignty. For Egypt, de-escalation is not just policy, it's a national security imperative. Cairo's diplomats walk a tightrope, leveraging ties with Israel and engaging Iran to prevent catastrophe. Egypt leads Arab efforts to forge unity, warning that any attack risks regional disaster. In constant dialogue with the US and Europe, Egypt urges restraint and a return to diplomacy, because the stakes are immediate, existential, and demand urgent action. While working tirelessly to prevent disaster, Egypt must also prepare for the unthinkable, a nuclear fallout incident. This means developing emergency plans, warning systems, and training for mass radiation casualties. International help would be vital, as would securing food, water, and safe shelter for affected populations. For Egypt, the Iran-Israel conflict is not just foreign news, it's a looming domestic crisis. The escalating rhetoric around Israel's Dimona facility has triggered global alarm. The UN and IAEA warn that a strike on a nuclear site could unleash disaster, undermining decades of non-proliferation efforts. NATO and world leaders urge restraint, fearing regional war and global fallout. The threat to Dimona is not just regional, it's a test for international security, with the world watching anxiously from New York, Vienna, and Brussels. For Saudi Arabia and the UAE, Iran's threat presents a high-stakes dilemma. Their proximity to Iran makes them vulnerable, with vital infrastructure at risk. While quietly cooperating with Israel and the US on defense, they also pursue diplomatic engagement with Tehran. The Gulf's strategy is clear: balance alliances and diplomacy to avoid becoming collateral damage in a dangerous regional conflict. As tensions rise, urgent diplomacy unfolds behind closed doors. Egypt, Qatar and Oman shuttle messages between Tehran, Jerusalem and Washington, racing to prevent disaster. The clock is ticking. Mediators warn that a strike on nuclear facilities would trigger devastating consequences and global isolation. While military forces stand ready, the real battle is fought in quiet back channels, where the stakes have never been higher. The Middle East stands at a pivotal moment. The rivalry between Iran and Israel, once shadowy, now threatens open conflict with Dimona at the center. This new era drags neighbors like Egypt into the crisis, making regional stability more fragile than ever. The choices made in Tehran and Jerusalem will ripple across Cairo, Amman, Riyadh, and beyond. The security of one is now the stability of all. The region teeters on the edge. Will it forge a new order, or fall into chaos? In a region where the risk of conflict is ever present, Egypt's path demands unwavering vigilance and strategic foresight. Robust military preparedness, agile diplomacy, and an informed public are essential for national resilience. The safety of over 100 million Egyptians depends on anticipating and mitigating threats before they reach its borders. For Egypt, staying safe means being ever watchful, ever prepared, and ever engaged in building peace in the shadow of war.